Testing. Oh, yeah. Test, 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 test. All right. It is time for us to begin again. And this time, we are not doing music. No. It's just the music is at the morning and the evening meeting. And these are more seminar times, I guess. I don't know. No, you didn't mess it up. It was beautiful. Oh, good. Excellent. I like questions. All right. Well, let's go ahead and pray, and then we will get into the causes of dysfunction. So I'll let a few people sit, and I will pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your blessings. Thank you for another day that you have given to us and a short break. And now as we discuss more in relation to health and these bodies, these temples that you have made for us, again, we ask for you to open our eyes and help us to see what we need to see and know what we need to know. And this I pray, thanking you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we are looking at the causes of dysfunction. And you already know what one of them is going to be. We'll get to that. Again, we need to have a solid foundation for the things that we discuss. And a solid foundation is natural law or moral law. Any law that comes from God is a solid foundation, is unchangeable, and that's what we want to build upon. And the fundamental law is that nothing exists or functions from itself, and nothing exists or functions for itself. In other words, everything takes to give, right? Everything takes to give. And so everything functions like a channel. And if you saw that already, that's great. The mind is like or the spirit is like a channel. It has to take and it has to give. The brain is like a channel, or the neurons. They have to take in one end and give on another end. And the cells have to take from that and give, and so on. Everything functions like a channel. With taking and giving has an entrance and an exit. It uses what it takes. And there's cause at the entrance and effect at the exit. So everything in creation, no matter how small it is, no matter how big it is, it functions according to that fundamental law. And so we're going to continue to look at another health condition to understand what's happening in the taking and giving perspective and to see how the breakdown in the system occurs to help us to understand what is possible and what is not possible. So it's important for us to be able to distinguish between the possible and the impossible. So for this example, we looked at digestion last time. We're going to look at hormone imbalance this time. Anybody familiar? I'm not saying personally familiar. You're just familiar with the topic of hormone dysregulation. Okay. All right. Yes. All right. And so there are quite a few hormones that the body that are produced. And so how does it happen? Well, you have the information that comes from the body. It's various needs that are signaled up to the cortex. The spirit is going to take that information. It's going to evaluate the information. It's going to use it. And then it'll make a decision based upon that information. And that decision gives power to the cortex of the brain. And the neurons in the cortex take the power, forms the electrical impulse. And the neurons are going to transmit or use that electrical impulse to the part of the lower brain that's called the hypothalamus. And it's right down here in this region. Right? And in the hypothalamus, the neurons are going to release or give neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters are going to be taken by the cells of the hypothalamus. And under the influence of those neurotransmitters, the cells of the hypothalamus up here, it's a little bit kind of closer picture.
I didn't start the recording until just now, so we lost 5 minutes. Do you want to start over? Just
Sorry. Yeah, no, let's go back. That's fine. Yeah, because we got people online and they just missed the beginning.
No, they got it, but the recording did not.
Oh, the recording didn't get it. Yes, the recording is important. So, brief review. The causes of dysfunction. We have the fundamental law that nothing exists or functions from itself, nothing exists or functions for itself. Everything takes to give. Everything functions as a channel, taking on one side, giving on the other, using what it takes, and cause is at the beginning and effect at the exit. And again, it doesn't matter how small or big it is, everything takes to give. And we are going to look at another system to find out what is possible or not, and that is our hormone balance or imbalance, right? Hopefully balance, but usually we don't complain until there's hormone imbalance. And so you have, again, you've got sensors in the body that can pick up chemical information, pressure information, all sorts of information, and can bring that information and send it up to the cortex, which is received by the spirit. It is evaluated by the spirit, and then a decision made based upon that information. Once that decision is made, it gives power to the cortex. When the cortex or the neurons of the cortex take that power, it now is, you can measure it in the form of electricity, like on an EEG, where you can measure the electrical activity of the brain. Those neurons are going to take that electrical impulse and send it down to a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, down there in the central portion of the brain. And there the neurons are going to release the neurotransmitters, so they're going to give. That's going to be taken by the next cells in the hypothalamus, which under the influence of those neurotransmitters, the cells are going to start, stop, increase, or decrease their production of hypothalamic hormones. So let me slow down a little bit. So you have a signal that's being sent from the cortex of the brain to that center part of the brain, the hypothalamus. When that signal gets there, it's going to release chemicals, and the cells there are going to pick up those chemicals, and now it's going to change how much of the hormones they produce. Right? It's going to change how much of the hormones that they produce, because the hypothalamus does produce their own hormones, and so the hypothalamus cells are going to give or release those hormones. Those get into little blood vessels. So up here is the hypothalamus, and you have some blood vessels here. It's going to give the chemicals, the hormones into those blood vessels, which are going to take that down to the pituitary gland. You've heard of the pituitary before? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. It's about the size of a pea. And so you have the pituitary gland down there. And that is then going to give those hormones to the pituitary cells. And the cells of the pituitary gland are going to take those hormones, and as a result, they're going to either start producing or increase their production of certain pituitary hormones. So you have hypothalamic hormones that influence the pituitary gland, and then the pituitary gland has hormones that it's going to release, and those pituitary hormones are going to get into the bloodstream and go to the rest of the body. And now it's going to get into the main circulation, and now it's going to circulate out through all of the rest of the body. And when it goes to the rest of the body, then the blood is going to give those pituitary hormones to various different organs in the body, like your thyroid. If you were little, a thymus. You're big now, you don't have that anymore. Your adrenal glands, your pancreas, your uterus, ovaries, and testes, and so on. So those are going to be the organs that pick up or take those pituitary hormones. And under the influence of those pituitary hormones, those organs cells are going to either start producing or increase their production of certain hormones that are specific to that organ. So the testes are going to primarily be producing testosterone. The ovaries are predominantly going to be producing estrogen. You have the production of progesterone as well. You have the production of thyroid hormone, of incretin and insulin and glucagon and so on and so forth from the pancreas. And, so there's various different hormones that the different endocrine organs will produce. And the cells of that organ, they're going to then give their hormones back into the bloodstream, and that's going to be transported throughout the body to the various different cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems in the body. And when that hormone gets to the cell that needs it, that cell is going to take in the hormone, and then the cell is going to either increase, decrease, start, or stop specific functions associated with that hormone that comes to the cell. Right? So it's a signal to the cell to either start something, stop something, increase it, or decrease it. Right? And then your neurons, your sensory nerves, are going to test the levels of the products that the cells produce. Right? So in response to the hormones, the cells are going to produce something, and you have sensors that can measure that and then send information back up to the cortex of the brain so that you have information feedback to say, okay, what's your estrogen level now? What is your progesterone level now? What is your testosterone level now? What is your thyroid level now? And so on and so forth, right? So you have that ability to measure these various different things in the body and send that back up so that it can be understood, analyzed, and then a response sent back to say, okay, too much, let's back off. Or too little, let's produce some more, and so on. And as the electrical impulse is given to the spirit, which takes the information and evaluates it, makes a decision what to do based upon that information, and the decision, again, we go back around, is going to put power back into the system, through the nervous system, to the body, to cause it to function. So, through the same complex pathway, the function of cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems are controlled or regulated, either increasing, decreasing, or starting or stopping the functions of the different parts of the body system to make sure that everything functions correctly. Right? And all of that is coordinated where? Yeah, up there. Right? It doesn't have a lot of weight, it doesn't have a lot of mass, but it has a lot of responsibility. A lot of responsibility. So, where can error or dysfunction be introduced into that system? So, chemical reactions, again, function according to the laws that govern their function, and electrical impulses function according to the laws that govern their function, and every physical process functions according to the laws that govern the function of that physical process, and so those laws do not change, and so those functions cannot change. Right? Now, the hypothalamus is going to take certain signals by law. And the hypothalamus responds to those signals by law. And the hypothalamus produces and releases the hormones that it gives by law. And the blood is going to take those hormones and transport them by law. All right? And the pituitary takes in those hormones by law, and so on through the entire process. It all happens by laws that govern the function of the chemicals in the whole process. Right? So every step of taking, using, and giving in the physical process functions by law. So if every step functions by law, then where can error or dysfunction be introduced into the system? Yeah, that's right. Well, one is by inheritance. Right? One is by inheritance. If the blueprint is wrong, the blueprint is broken, then you're going to have problems. Right? You're going to have problems. Two is by chemicals. If you don't have the right chemicals, things are not going to function the way that they're supposed to. You got to have it. Three is trauma. You can traumatize the system by pressure, temperature, and so on, radiation, or the mind. Right? So these are the four things that we're going to look at right now. When it comes to inheritance, of course, the information that's used to build your cells and the products that the cells produce, that's in the form of your genetic material or DNA, right? And certain sections of your DNA contain information that's used to make proteins. And a section of your DNA that makes a particular protein is called a gene. And you have lots of genes because there are lots of proteins that are needed to make up the structure and to make up the products that the cells make. And proteins make up the structure. Enzymes of the cells used to function are made from proteins. Much of the products that the cells produce are made from proteins as well. And they're necessary for the structure, the function, and the products of the cells. And if there's damage to the DNA, then, or there's errors when the cell copies the DNA, then the gene can be damaged. And so you end up, instead of having a normal product, you end up getting an abnormal product or no product. And when the gene is damaged, it changes the structure of the protein it codes for, and that changes the function of the protein. And so that can become a dysfunctional protein at that point. And if it's dysfunctional, well, you'll find out somehow. So whenever and wherever that protein is used in the cell, it will affect how the cell functions. Right? Now, if we think of that genetic material like the blueprint for a house, then if you damage the blueprint over here, right, so you tear that section out or you change some of the information in it, then whatever is made according to the damaged part of the blueprint is going to be misformed. It'll be misshaped. It won't function the way that it's supposed to. But not everything uses every part of the blueprint. Right? If it's not made correctly, let's say, for instance, that was the blueprint for the bathroom, well, then there's going to be problems in the bathroom. But if the rest of the blueprints are okay, well, the rest of the house might be okay. But the bathroom's not going to be okay. Right, because you built it wrong according to the wrong blueprint. And so it'll affect the structure of the house and the area that corresponds to where the blueprint was damaged, but it won't affect the rest of the house that was made according to the correct blueprint. Got it? Okay. So if somebody that has a disease that's a result of inheritance, then some things must be true. One, the damage is to the DNA or the blueprint. It happened in a prior generation, so that came from parents, grandparents, and so on. And you received the damaged blueprint when you were one cell. After the union of sperm and egg come together and you have one cell, right? So the dysfunction came as an effect, and so you had it at one cell. Also, it must be that from that one cell, all of your cells arise. Right? I mean, unless you had some other cells that came from somewhere, alien life, you know, and whatever, all of your cells are going to come from that one. And that means that every cell receives a copy of the damaged blueprint. Correct? Yeah. Now, certain cells will only use certain parts of the blueprint. So if you're making this type of cell, looks like a neutrophil, granulocyte. Anyways, if you're using that kind of cell, then it will use certain parts of the blueprint. If you're making a neuron, then that'll use other parts of the blueprint. If you are using an intestinal cell, that will use other parts of the blueprint. If you're using a muscle cell and so on, then so on. So not every cell uses every part of the blueprint, and you have over 200 different types of cells in your body, and each type has a certain structure and certain products that it produces that are specific to it, right? Specific to that type of cell. And the only cells that will be affected by the broken blueprint are the cells that use that part of the blueprint. So let's say this guy uses the defective part of the blueprint. Well, all of these guys can function just fine. That one's going to be affected. But if there's a disease that's the result of inheritance, it must manifest itself in all cells that use the broken part of the blueprint, right? So, if this is the type of cell that has the broken blueprint, how many of those cells are you going to find the problem? All of them, right? It's not just going to be, okay, well, Joe over here on the left and Mary right there next to her. Those are ones that have the problem, and all the rest of them are okay. That's not what you'll see when it's inheritance. When it's inheritance, it's got to be all of them that use the broken blueprint, right? So it must manifest through all cells of a particular type. And that means that the inherited disease will not begin in a few cells and then grow from there. Right? If it's inheritance, it's not going to begin in a few cells and then grow from there. So it will manifest everywhere that those cells are found. So if somebody has colon cancer that develops in a part of the colon and then starts growing from there, that is not inheritance. Right? Now that's not to say that inheritance doesn't play a role. Right? That doesn't say that inheritance can't play a role. That doesn't mean that there might not be broken genes or other things like that that are somewhere through the system, but if it's truly inheritance that's the cause, you'll find it throughout all of the cells of a particular type. If you have arthritis that develops in several joints, well, that can't be inheritance either. Because if it's inheritance, where would you find it? All the cells of the same type. And you have the same type of cells, essentially, that line the joints of all of the joints, right? If you had a nodule or nodules that grow in the thyroid, like here you have a left-sided thyroid nodule, and so on, well, that is not the result of inheritance, right? Can't be. If it was inheritance, where would you find it? Through the thyroid, right? Throughout the thyroid. And another aspect is that inheritance typically manifests when you're little, right? Because you have the defect all the time, all the way from fetal development. So you shouldn't have a period where you have normal function and then you end up with dysfunction, right? It should be something where you have dysfunction along the line. Right, because it's there all along. And the blueprint doesn't change itself. It's there and it remains there. And so the symptoms associated with an inherited condition, if they're caused by the inherited condition, should not be something that comes and goes. Right? It shouldn't be something that comes and goes. It should be something that's constant. Right? So if there's a come and go, and if there's other factors above and beyond the inherited condition that are involved, right, then there has to be something else that we're looking for in addition to inheritance. So hormone imbalance that develops later in life is not inheritance. Right? That's not inheritance because you had a normal functioning period and now you have a dysfunctional period. Yeah, I just said that, didn't I? Anyway, so a period of time right? You had a normal period of time, and then you had an abnormal period of time, and then then you have dysfunction that comes with it. Pun unintended. All right. So as opposed to genetic, well, when you talk about inheritance, we're talking about DNA problems that happen, that derangements or damage that happen before your lifetime. If it happens during your lifetime, that's not inheritance. right? If there's damage that happens during your lifetime to the DNA, that's not inheritance. And so I'm not talking about epigenetics or the moment-by-moment regulation of the genome. When we talk about inheritance, we're only talking about the defects of the DNA that occurred in a prior generation and are passed on to future generations and how that functions. All right? The other genetic issues are another issue that should be covered at another time, but it's complex. And I figure it could be another time. Right? But genetics are involved in every disease process because you have to have the program. Right? You got to have the program there as well. Now, a second cause for dysfunction is in the body is chemicals. And to understand how they work, we need to consider a few things. So let's imagine that we went on a cruise, and instead of having the camp meeting here, we had a camp meeting on a cruise liner. And we're in the middle of the South Pacific, and things are going wonderful, and then all of a sudden a typhoon comes up, and everything's not so wonderful, and then everything goes over, and the poor thing just goes down. Yes, and it's problematic. And you survive, and you make it to a small Pacific island. Thankfully, you were close enough to something like this, and you get yourself on there, and you start looking around, and you notice that on that white sandy shore of the island, you see something in the distance, and you walk closer to it, and here you find that. All right. So, do you conclude that the sand made the sandcastle, and there's likely nobody else on the island? No. Or the sand cannot make sandcastles, and therefore there must be someone else on the island? All right, so the second one, we would all come to that conclusion, right? Either two of us made it off of that ship and made it to that island, and somebody was a faster swimmer and was bored really fast after that and made a sandcastle, or there's somebody else living on that South Pacific island. So while sand cannot make a sandcastle, no one can make a sandcastle without sand, right? Because then it wouldn't be a sandcastle. Right? You can make some other products, and you can make a bark castle or a leaf castle or something like that, but it's not a sand castle. You have to have sand to make a sand castle. And without it, you cannot have a sand castle, but the sand never makes the sand castle. It's always something else that uses the sand or acts upon the sand in order to make the sand castle. You might say, what does this have to do with anything? Oh, it has so much to do. So much to do with everything. All right, so that's a larger example of what happens to chemicals on a microscopic scale. All right. So let's look at another example. Here you have the Great Salt Lake in Utah, which is not so great, and it's going away, and I'm not sure how many years it'll be before it's gone, but it will be gone. The Great Salt Lake in Utah, it's made of water, sodium, potassium, magnesium, lithium, and chlorine. Woohoo! So if you go to the Great Salt Lake, do you expect to find a big old blob of water over there, and you see a pile of sodium over there, and a pile of potassium there, and a pile of magnesium there, and lithium there, and chlorine over there? No. Is that how it works? No, that's not how it works. If you found those different piles, of course, having a pile of chlorine would be a little bit difficult. It's gas. But if you did and you went and you found those, what would you think? Oh, you would think somebody did it, right? Clearly, somebody was there and somebody was monkeying around with the chemicals and they left these all in piles. You wouldn't expect that to be a natural process. So, do you expect those chemicals will be mixed together in a relatively even concentration throughout the lake? Yeah, that's how it goes, right? Diffusion. Right? You get it out there and it kind of diffuses and so on. So there's a relatively even distribution throughout the lake, and that's because the natural tendency to clump together and stay together is not the natural tendency, right? That would be somebody that went there and clumped it together and separated everything. Its natural tendency is to distribute, right? Its natural tendency is mixing together. And so if you dump a 5-gallon bucket of pink water-soluble dye in the northern part of the lake, what do you expect is going to happen with that dye? Yeah. Do you expect it to clump together where you dumped it? No. Or do you expect it to spread out and eventually distribute throughout the lake? Yeah, it'll spread out, and here you're in the spreading out process. It hasn't made it farther than that, but you give it enough time and it'll continue to do so. Right. So that's a larger example of what chemicals do on a smaller scale. Chemicals do not concentrate themselves. Let me say that again. Chemicals do not concentrate themselves. They don't have the capacity to do so. Chemicals don't act for themselves. They can only react. And chemicals can respond to external forces, and they will do so in predictable ways according to law. And under the same conditions, chemicals will react the same way. I know, I'm beating it to life. But these are things that we misunderstand, and we've been taught for years in a different mindset and a different way of looking at it, and it takes repetition to really break through some of that. All right, so chemicals can be concentrated by something else, but they cannot concentrate themselves. They can be used as a part of the process, but they cannot create a process. And when it comes to chemicals in your body, chemicals will usually be absorbed into your body through your skin, your respiratory tract, and your GI tract. Right? That's where most of your absorption happens. And once absorbed, those chemicals are going to get into your blood, and they're going to circulate where? Yeah, everywhere. And so to find out what chemicals you have in the system, I don't have to have the lab technician draw it from your foot or specify which side. I just have them draw it, right? So if there's a chemical in your bloodstream, it's going to be at essentially the same concentration throughout your bloodstream. Again, a little bit differences that we talked about before. And it isn't that some chemicals are sent to your arm, other chemicals are sent to your leg, some chemicals go to the right side of your body, and other chemicals go to the left side of your body. Is that how it works? No, not at all. It all goes everywhere. Remember that. It's important. It's important. So all chemicals get into the blood, distribute through the blood, relatively even concentration, and then circulate in the body to all parts of the body, like the Great Salt Lake example. So each cell, however, has a cell membrane, remember? And that cell membrane has the ability to keep stuff out or to bring stuff in, right? And it's the cell that can extract certain chemicals from the bloodstream and leave other chemicals in the bloodstream, right? And it uses an electrochemical power to move certain chemicals against their concentration gradient, like a salmon trying to swim upstream. It takes power to get upstream. So you have to put power into the system in order to get chemicals against their concentration gradient so that you can concentrate them. And so the cell, which has a cell membrane and has the power to do that work, it can concentrate chemicals in a certain place. It's not the chemicals themselves, but it's the cell that can concentrate the chemicals. All right? The chemicals, so that means that the cells determine where the chemicals are going to end up in the body. It's not the chemicals that decide where they end up, right? So the chemicals are like the sand, and the cells are like the hands that build the sandcastle, right? But all of the cells themselves are made of chemicals, and the products that they produce are chemicals, and the energy that perpetuates their function comes from chemicals. That's the fuel. And in order for them to function well, you have to have the right concentration. If you have too much, or if you have too little, well, that's not going to work. Or if you have the wrong kinds of chemicals, like poisons or venoms, well, that's not going to work so much either. And different type of cells will use different chemicals at different rates. So if your brain cells use oxygen, they use them very quickly. And that's why if you stop breathing and you start drowning, well, it's your brain cells that are going to die first, And you might have other cells in your body that are just hanging out. They're like, oh, I'm fine. Brain's dead. Those other cells, they're still fine. They're hanging out. And then you give them a little while longer, and then they're not hanging out so well, and then they're not hanging out so well, and then they have So not every cell will die at the same rate, but if you cut off oxygen, every cell is eventually going to die, right? And the thyroid uses iodine, and lots of it to do its work. So if you're running low on iodine, well, it's going to affect the thyroid first. And if you overdose on Tylenol, or you come from the other side of the world, at Panadol, then that's primarily going to damage the liver because you digest it, gets into the circulation, goes to the liver has to detoxify it, it has its toxic effects there, and so on and so forth. So you can see chemicals manifesting problems in certain areas of the body first, right? And but it should be relatively evenly across all of the cells that use that chemical, right? Should be relatively evenly, so kind of like inheritance, right? Kind of like inheritance. So if you ate some kind of chemical and you only ended up with an ulcer here in your intestines, but you didn't end up with ulcers in other places, my question is, was it just the chemical? Because you had that chemical exposure all the way from the mouth out, right? So if it was the chemical itself, it should affect where? From the mouth out. Of course, there are certain factors. There's more mucus in the stomach, and so maybe it didn't affect the stomach as much because the mucus protected it, but less mucus in the mouth and in the esophagus and so on. So, you should see patterns like that if it was the chemical itself. Now, let's look at some specific conditions. What's this? All right, you got gout. All right. So gouty arthritis, it's typically at the first metatarsal phalangeal joint, or the base of the first big toe. And that is characterized by redness, swelling, exquisite pain, very, very painful, in the joint that's affected. And in the emergency department where I was working, sometimes people had it in the left foot, other people had it in the right foot, some people had it in both feet. And it's painful, right? And so we know gout is caused by uric acid, because if you go there and you suck out the fluid from the joint and you look at it under the microscope, you can identify uric acid crystals that are there. And when the uric acid becomes super concentrated, it's like making crystal candy. You ever made rock candy? Yeah, you get a toothpick or something across the top of the cup, and you get a string to hang down in there, and then you get the water nice and hot, and you pour as much sugar as you can into there. Or of course, you want to trick the kids and make rock candy. You put salt in there, and they won't be so happy with you. And then, look, rock candy, kids. Salt. And anyways, but you use sugar, and you get as much as you can in there, and then you let it cool down. And as it cools down, it super concentrates, and now it needs to go somewhere. And that thread has little threads coming off of it. That's a great place for it to start crystallizing, and it'll start crystallizing there, and then the crystals will add to the crystals, and so on and so forth, and it will build. That's a natural process. All right. Now, uric acid crystals, they don't look like rock candy. They look like needles. And when you get a whole bunch of needles in a joint space, ouch, yeah. So it can damage the tissue around the joint, and that results in inflammation and severe pain and so on and so forth. And the easier way to discover whether you have gout is not to send you to the lab to draw fluid out of your joint space. It's to send you with your arm or your hand and have them draw blood from that area, right? And if the uric acid levels are elevated in the blood, we assume the problem in the joint is gout. And we can give medication that causes the kidneys to dump more uric acid into the urine, and that can decrease your uric acid levels, and when it gets low enough, the gout goes away. Woohoo! We fixed the problem, right? Skeptics. All right. So was the uric acid the problem? So I've had patients that have had high uric acid levels and never had any gout. And I've had other patients that have had low uric acid levels, and this one, it confounded me for a while. I didn't know what they had. It looked a lot like gout, but I didn't know it was gout because their uric acid levels were low. It was still gout. It was still gout. And you can have patients that have gout in their left great toe, but not in their right great toe. How is that?
Dysfunction.
So if the uric acid concentration in the blood is the same going to the right leg as the left leg, why did the problem manifest in the left great toe, not the right great toe?
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel OSVFX. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create.
You're good. You're good. We play right along with it. Right? So that's the uric acid. All right, so anyway, another way of asking the question is, why is the sandcastle in this part of the beach? Why is it in the left great toe? Is it because the sand decided to make a sandcastle here? No. All right, the answer is not that the uric acid was in that part of the body and concentrated there, because uric acid can't concentrate itself. It's going throughout all of the body. So the answer must explain why the uric acid is concentrated in that part of the body, and it must include cells that surround the affected joint, because the only thing that can concentrate chemicals in the body is cells. So the cells must have used their cell membranes to take the uric acid out of the bloodstream, pump it into the affected joint, causing it to be super concentrated. And now natural law takes over. You super concentrate a crystal in a liquid environment. I mean, a crystalline subject that's in solution, and you super concentrate it, it'll come out of solution and now crystallize, right? So now you have the gouty arthritis, but what would cause the cells to concentrate the uric acid over there rather than there and other parts? All right. Here you have coronary atherosclerosis, so coronary artery disease, right? So you have fatty deposits, we call them plaques, that are on the walls of the arteries, and they bring, we're going to say this is a coronary artery and a blood vessel that's bringing blood to the heart muscle. Very important. And those can enlarge over time, typically years to decades, where they start blocking blood flow. Then you start having chest pain. It starts blocking off the fuel to the muscle that's needed to function. And if it gets big enough, then the artery it's not going to get blood flow to the rest of it, and the muscle's going to die for lack of fuel, and we call that a heart attack. Good idea, not a good idea? Not a good idea, right? Now, it's not the only reason for a heart attack, but it's a prominent one, right? You can have blood clots that come from other places and lodge in there and so on. All right, since a major component of a plaque is cholesterol, when you start developing coronary artery disease, one of the things your doctor is going to want to do is put you on medication in order to reduce your cholesterol levels. I mean, like, no duh, right? Of course. And the idea is that we're going to reduce your cholesterol level low enough that the plaque will start going away, or its growth is going to slow or stop so that you can avoid or delay the heart attack. That's the idea. And the problem is that cholesterol is a necessary chemical for your body, and it's part of every cell membrane of the body. It's the basis of all steroid hormones in your body, estrogen, testosterone, and so on and so forth. That uses cholesterol. Vitamin D is used. It's made from cholesterol. And if you lower your cholesterol levels too low, it's possible that you can, then you're going to disrupt normal function of other parts of the body. So, in addition, plaques don't develop evenly throughout the blood vessels. If you have someone with coronary artery disease and you do a coronary angiogram, which is where you put a catheter in and you inject dye, and then you take x-rays while the dye is going through the blood vessels, and you get to see where the dye channel is nice and big, and then you get to see where it's skinny, and then where it's big again, and so on. Then you can take a look at it, or you can do what's called intravascular ultrasound, where they take a probe, very small one that has an ultrasound device around it, and you go in the middle of the artery, and you look at the walls of the artery while you're going through, and it can take a look at the plaque and how much fat that's in there and so on. However you do it, you're going to see that there's some plaque development in most parts of the arteries of adults, but there's going to be, maybe 1 spot, 2 spots, 3 spots, 5 spots, 6 spots that have large plaque development that's already there. So the plaque development isn't even. If it was simply a natural process, it should look like this. Right? That would be a natural process. That's not what you see. What you see is this. Right? And the usual explanation for the uneven distribution of plaque is that there was damage to the lining of the artery that led to inflammation. And now with the inflammation, you have the development of the plaque in that location. Right? So that's the usual explanation of it. Let me ask you, have you ever cut yourself? Yes. Are you still bleeding? No. You mean you don't bleed for years or decades? No. What happens when you cut yourself? Yeah, it clots off, and then it starts, a healing process, and so on. So usually the bleeding stops in seconds to minutes. We like seconds better. And they heal completely within days to weeks. But we're told that the damage to the lining of the blood vessel doesn't heal for years to decades. I mean, I understand the theory, and on one level it seems to make sense. But then when you start thinking about it, I'm not sure that makes sense, right? It doesn't make sense to me. So there has to be another explanation. So it's clear that the cholesterol accumulates in those locations, but it must be that the cells in those locations are somehow responsible for bringing or concentrating the cholesterol and developing the plaque. Right? But what causes the cells to do that? All right, so what about cancer? Here you have a woman, she develops breast cancer. This is her right breast, upper outer quadrant, and so on. And let's say that she's obese. She eats lots of processed red meats, hot dogs, bacon, salami, ham, sausages, pepperoni, jerky, corned beef, bologna, and so on. She's sedentary. Her mother and her mother's mother had a history of breast cancer as well. So we look at that and we say you have a lot of, I heard it, risk factors, right? You have a bunch of risk factors, right? And so we say, okay, well, sure, you're a woman, you're obese, you eat food that's known to cause cancer, you're sedentary, you have a positive family history of breast cancer. Those are risk factors for developing breast cancer. That's why you have breast cancer. But have you ever met anybody that ate any of those things and didn't develop breast cancer? Yes. Yeah, have you ever met anybody that was obese and didn't develop breast cancer? Have you met anybody that had any of those risk factors and didn't actually have the cancer? I have. Right? So, if you have anybody that has the risk factors but doesn't develop the condition, it shows you that those aren't the cause. They might be associated, there's an association, but they're not the cause. Because if you can have the condition without the cause, or you can have the cause without the condition, there's a problem there. So there's an association, sure. And we must ask ourselves the question, why did the breast cancer develop on the right upper outer breast? Right? Why didn't it develop in the left? Right? The food that she ate went where? Both breasts. Right? And the fat deposits from her obesity involved both breasts. And the genes from her mother? Both breasts. Right? So why the right? Right? So the problem began in the right, not the left, and that's a question of why. Why is the sandcastle on the right side and not on the left side? So there's got to be something about the cells in that location that took the harmful chemicals from the food that was in the bloodstream and used it. But what? What was it there? Right? There's got to be something about the cells in that location that turned the dysfunctional genes on that were there since conception. And do the cells do that themselves? Oh. Or are they controlled? And if they are, what are they controlled by? Right? And how are they controlled? All right, if the dysfunction is caused by chemicals alone, then it must be seen throughout all cells that use that particular chemical. And it must, like inheritance, be there where it cannot start in one spot amongst those types of cells. It must start throughout those types of cells. And it must manifest relatively evenly amongst all of those cells. And if you go to see the beach and the beach is relatively even, you might think that you're alone. But when you go to the beach and you find a sandcastle that you didn't build, you know someone else is there. Right? Someone else is there. And if you have a hormone imbalance because you're deficient in certain nutrients, or you have excessive nutrients, what's the cause of that? Well, it has a relation to your consumption and your absorption. And what is a controller of your consumption and your absorption? Yes, the mind. And what is it that decides what you consume and how much of it you consume? Okay. Now, you can have trauma as well. Every cell exists and lives within a certain environmental parameters, and human cells function at normal body temperature. And the farther you get away from normal body temperature, the more dysfunction you have. You can make it to about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's about as far as you can make it, typically, and live still. If you remain there very long, you're not going to live very long, but you can, the heart, the electrical activity of the heart becomes very dysregulated when it becomes cold. Starting to have dysrhythmias and very significant dysrhythmias and so on. That's problematic. I remember taking care of a poor hunter. He had gone hunting not only with a gun but also with beer. And so he had his, 24-pack or whatever up in the deer stand with him. And this was Michigan, and hunting season, November-ish or so. And Michigan in November can be a little bit cold. And of course, what time do you go hunting? Do you go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Yeah, you go weekends, right? Because you're working during the week, so you go hunting on the weekend. So he had his beer, and he had his deer stand, and he had his gun, and he had his ready for his deer, and he had a few too many beer, looking for the deer, and oh dear. And he fell out of the stand, and he landed on his head, and he broke his neck. And 2 days later, when he didn't go to work, his friends started looking for him. Thankfully, he told somebody he was going hunting, and they eventually found him 2 days later, quadriplegic, at the bottom of the hunting stand, and close to 90 degrees. All right. So we had to warm him up, and we had to warm him up quickly, and so on. But it was not going to be a good story for him. Because he had a full spinal cord injury, and he was going to be looking at a quadriplegic life after that point. And I'm sure there were probably times in his life where he would have thought, oh, I wish I would have died at the bottom of that thing when I fell and not survived. But he was alive, and God had a purpose for his life still. Now, you can damage or destroy cells by temperatures that are too high, so you can burn, or too low, you can freeze. And one of the ways that you can transfer heat from one thing to another is through radiation. And so sun, it keeps our planet warm through radiation. Infrared saunas warm you up by radiation. Around a campfire, that's going to warm you up by radiation. And you need a certain amount of radiation to remain warm and alive. But if it gets too much or too little, well, you can burn or freeze. And then there are certain types of frequencies of radiation that don't work so well under high concentrations like X-ray and gamma and so on and so forth, right? That can damage the DNA, and it can damage the DNA beyond the capacity of the cell that's damaged to heal. Now, every cell needs certain chemicals, a certain chemical environment as well. And sometimes you can be exposed to certain chemicals like acids or bases that will destroy the cells and tissues that it comes into contact with. So you get chemical burns. That can happen too. And when it comes to trauma, your cells also function within a certain range of pressure. And if the pressure is too low, like really high altitudes or outer space, or if it's too high, like deep sea diving, car accidents, falls, cuts, abrasions, and whatever, then you can have trauma to the cells and the tissues of the body from that trauma. And trauma, whether it's scraping, cutting, crushing, breaking, freezing, burning, and whatever, it's going to damage the structure of the tissue of the body. And structure is needed for function, so it will disrupt the function. Trauma is not going to create new function. You're not going to cut your arm off and then figure out how to fly. Right? It just doesn't work. It takes away existing function. That's what trauma does. It takes away existing function. And trauma can be localized. You can smash one finger and the other fingers are okay. Right? So it can be localized. You can burn one side of your body and the other side of your body is okay. Right? And you can get too cold and you can get frostbite in certain parts of your body and other parts of your body are okay. And you can undergo radiation therapy and you can burn certain parts of your body that are radiated and other parts of the body are okay, are unaffected. And so one thing to recognize about environment or trauma is that it disrupts existing function. It does not create new function. Right? Now, if you have a laceration, and afterwards, when you heal, the scar tissue overgrows and becomes a keloid like that, that's not trauma. Now, trauma, of course, created the initial dysfunction, but the result of getting the keloid is not the cause of trauma. That has something to do with the healing process. So now there's a dysfunction in the healing system. And now we have to ask ourselves the question, okay, well, what's going on in the healing system that results in something like this developing after trauma? But it's not the trauma itself that's the cause. So some people have an ulcer that develops after trauma, and it may last for a long time. And sometimes the result is growth of a cancer in the ulcer, but the cancer is not the result of the trauma. Right? It's the result of other factors in that chronic wound, including what's behind the reason that that wound sticks around for a long time. There's a problem behind that. Right? So trauma can cause dysfunction in a localized part of the body, but when that happens, you usually remember that you got stabbed there, or you had the car accident that happened there, or the thing happened there. Sometimes you're not aware of it because you got stabbed in the back and you didn't see it coming. But usually, or somebody can tell you later, no, remember you were in the car accident? What? I was in a car accident? Yeah, that was like 6 months ago. You still can't remember? What? I was in a, Yeah, you were in a car accident. Really? When was that? Oh, it was like 6 months ago. You mean I was in a car accident? Yeah. When was that? Like 6 months ago. When you damage the hard drive, sometimes accessing the information gets a little difficult. And you can have problems from that standpoint. All right. So the trauma never creates a new process or disease. It only disrupts a normal function until the trauma is healed, if it heals. It could be too much that it doesn't. And if your hormone imbalance came as after a physical trauma that damaged a part of the system necessary for proper hormone production and function, then you should remember the event, or somebody should be able to tell you and remind you of the event. But the question remains, why didn't it heal? Right? Now, it's true that some traumas are too large to be repaired naturally. Right? You and I just don't grow new limbs. We don't have that capacity. We're not a salamander. Salamanders, I found out, they do grow new limbs. And I also found out that if you put different species of salamanders together in the same tank, and they're too bored, then they will start eating each other's legs off and then growing new legs back. Just a little FYI for salamanders. I did some research on salamanders in college, and I found that out. But anyways, humans, if we started eating each other's legs off, we would not grow new legs back. All right, we're not built for that. So, but if it wasn't too large, and it didn't heal properly, the question is why? And finally, our fourth cause of dysfunction is the mind. And again, every location in the body is connected through the nervous system to some point in the brain. And information from the body can be sent to the mind, and the mind can evaluate the information. It can decide what to do about it. It can send signals back to the appropriate parts of the body and regulate what happens in the body. It's a marvelous system, very marvelous. Right? And the vast majority of this all happens unconsciously, so it's your mind that regulates all processes in the body, and that's not to say that all processes need the body to function. Again, chemistry will do what chemistry does under certain conditions, under the laws that govern their function. But the controller, the regulator, the thing that speeds up and slows down or stops and starts processes in the body, that is the mind, right? That's the mind. So it's the mind that controls your blood pressure, how much fluid is in your bloodstream, your heart rate, when your hormones are produced, how much of them are produced. That's controlled by the mind. And your mind controls your digestive system and how much acid, digestive enzymes, bile, and mucus is produced. And your mind controls your kidneys, your livers, your livers, your liver, your lungs, your reproductive organs, skin, muscles, living cells, and so on in your bones. And your mind controls your immune system and its functions. What does your mind not control? Me. What does my mind not control? You. Praise God. So your mind controls how much of the chemicals are produced in your body and can regulate to a degree how much of certain chemicals are absorbed, to a degree. So remember, your mind is a combination of your central nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, and your spirit. It is not your brain alone that thinks, it is your spirit. It is not your spirit alone that thinks, it is your mind that thinks, right? But you have to have both in order to think. And your brain is composed of chemicals that are dependent upon chemicals for its fuel, and it must have certain chemicals to be able to function properly. And if those chemicals are missing, if they're too low, if they're too much, if they're unneeded chemicals or harmful chemicals that are present, then the brain will not be able to function like it's supposed to. So you can create dysfunction in your thinking by creating a dysfunction in the chemicals that are needed for the brain. You can do that. Right? And so this will affect the information that the spirit receives from the body through the brain. Right? If there are chemical deficiencies or toxicities or poisons, it will affect that. And that can lead to confusion. It can lead to delusions or hallucinations and other manifestations of mental health disorders. All right? All of those can come because you have chemicals that are not in the right concentrations or not the right chemicals. And the brain itself doesn't regulate the chemicals it produces. The chemicals the brain produces are the result of the spirit's action upon the brain. All right? That's another important one. It's not the brain that regulates its own production of chemicals. It's the spirit that controls the neurons in the brain and what chemicals are produced and how much are produced and so on. And if the spirit is not functioning properly, it can dysregulate the chemicals that the brain produces, which then creates chemical imbalances in the brain and can change to a degree the brain structure. So you've heard of neuroplasticity. right? Well, neuroplasticity is not a function of the brain. It's something that happens to the brain, but it's not a function of the brain. Neuroplasticity is a function of the spirit working on the brain, which can change the structure of the brain and new connections to new neurons and how many connections that there are and so on and so forth. Right? And these changes can also lead to confusion, delusions, hallucinations, and other manifestations of mental health disorders. So you can end up with mental health challenges both from a chemical origin or from a mind origin, which both can affect the physical structure of the brain and the chemicals of the brain and so on and so forth. And sometimes it gets a little difficult teasing between the two. Was this a nutritional issue or a deficiency or something else of that nature that led to this dysfunctional thinking? Or was it dysfunctional thinking that led to the dysfunction of the chemicals that are produced in the brain and the chemical milieu that's there that then amplifies the dysfunctional thinking that was there originally? So that's, not everything that looks like demon possession is demon possession. But dysregulated function of the mind will always look dysregulated, right? Dysregulated function of the mind will always look dysregulated regardless of where the dysregulation is coming from. So mental health challenges that can be chemically based can look very much like demonic type of issues. And demonic issues can look very much like mental health challenges and so on and so forth. And it's not just cut and dry differentiating between the two, right? Because dysfunction looks like dysfunction, and the enemy is dysfunctional, right? And so when he gets involved, dysfunction will result. But chemicals can be dysfunction as well, and physical structure can be dysfunction as well, and that can lead to dysfunction too. So, since all functions in the body are regulated through the mind, you need an intact and functional brain and an intact functional spirit to properly control all the functions in the body. But what is it that the spirit needs in order to be functional? Yes. So for the food for the spirit is spiritual information. And the type of spiritual information that the Spirit needs, we call truth, but we also need love. Right? And Jesus always spoke the truth in love, because that's our need, truth and love. Right? So both love and truth are spiritual information, and truth is information that puts things in the correct order so that they function. And the Spirit needs that kind of spiritual information. It was made for truth. It was not made for error. And error is information that puts things in the wrong order so that they dysfunction. And the Spirit doesn't need error. It's not a need for the Spirit, right? So if the Spirit is under the influence of error, then it will not be able to control the functions of the body the way that it's supposed to, and both spiritual and physical dysfunction will result. Right? And so the Spirit's greatest need is love, to take love from God and give love to others, and the mind does this by believing the spiritual information that comes from God, which is the truth, and then giving love-motivated decisions to the body. Because you can only give love through the body, right? You can only give love through the body. So it must be given, it must be taken by the Spirit, processed, believed, and now by its decisions, making love-based decisions through the body for the body to act lovingly, right, towards others. And so then that puts the body to action. All right. So the decisions given to the body control the functions and movements of the body so that through the body, manifestations of love can be given to others. And so love is spiritual information. It has power. And the Spirit takes that information, it passes it along, and love gives power to the Spirit to function. And if the mind is deceived into believing that error is the truth and truth is the error, oh boy. Is that a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. Then it will take in the error, it will evaluate things the wrong way, it'll make the wrong decisions, and through its wrong decisions, give the wrong power to the body. Right? And then the wrong electrical impulses will be generated in the cortex of the brain, and through the brain, those electrical impulses will be transmitted through the nerves to the different places of the body that are connected to them, and you end up with digestive dysfunction, intestinal interruptions. Yes. And the wrong signal sent by the nerve will negatively impact the functions of the cells or the tissues that are controlled by that nerve. And, oh boy, that's the way the error in the mind can result in dysfunction in the body. And it can be very specific and very localized. So you can have a dysfunction that ends up in that joint of that toe because you have a nerve ending that comes from a specific place in your cortex of your brain, and the impulse can be generated up here and it can end up down there, right? So an erroneous thought that generates a wrong impulse in the upper inner portion of the right brain can be sent down to the left great toe, and then because the nerves carrying the impulse from the right brain crosses to the left side, so you get it, right brain controls left body, left brain, right body, then that signal is received by the cells in the area. They begin to concentrate uric acid in that joint space, which results in the uric acid crystallizing, and now you have gouty arthritis. And what do? Well, we take medication to treat the pain and decrease the uric acid levels, and eventually that resolves the gouty attack, but you never deal with the sandcastle builder. You only dealt with the sandcastle. You didn't deal with the origin of the issue in the mind, right? So you've treated the sand, and you've removed the sandcastle by treating the sand, but you haven't done anything with the sandcastle builder. Okay. So you can have an erroneous thought that creates a wrong signal in the cortex of the brain. That can be sent to a place in the wall of your coronary artery. That signal is then given to the living cells in the area that concentrate cholesterol or carry cholesterol from another location and leave it behind in that area. And now the signal, it continues, the process continues. You eventually develop a plaque in your artery near the end of that nerve. And that goes on for how long? Years to decades, right? Years to decades. Thought begins here, ends up here. Cells concentrate the cholesterol that already exists, or deposit, the white blood cells and so on deposit. And what do? Well, you take cholesterol-lowering medication and you change your diet, but you never deal with the underlying cause of the problem, the erroneous thought that was the origin in the first place. And you have an erroneous thought that creates a wrong signal in the cortex of the brain, and that signal is sent to the right upper outer breast. And in response to the signal, living cells in that area of the nerve change how they function. And now, in combination with you eating the bratwurst, salami, and all that kind of stuff, your processed red meats, and whatever inheritance that you had from your mother, and so on and so forth, those nerve signals result in certain genes being turned on and others being turned off, and cancer begins to grow. And when you discover that, well, you have surgery, and you do chemotherapy, and maybe radiation, and you change your diet, please, at least. But you don't deal with the erroneous thought that was underlying the problem. So you're trying to remove the sandcastle without dealing with the sandcastle builder. Right? All right. So everybody knows stress is not good for you. Right? Everybody knows if you've got a disease, stress is not going to make it any better. And everybody knows that the more stress you get, the more disease you're going to have and die from. Right? But we don't know how it happens. We don't think about how it happens. So if you don't think about this, what's behind it, we think stress is something that we can control or we cannot control because it's dependent upon external factors that we don't have control over, so poor me, poor me. And why do we come to those conclusions? Well, do you know what stress is and where it comes from? Is stress about what happens to you, or is it about how you perceive what happens to you? Yeah, it's about perception. And if your perceptions are based upon error, you will be stressed. And if your perceptions are based upon truth, you won't be stressed. Was Jesus going around stressed? No. Did he have a truth perspective? Yes, he did. Did he put his body under pressure by believing error? No. Was he diseased? No. So, what do we need? We need the truth. And where do we find the truth? In the Word. Right? We find the truth in the Word. And the Word made flesh. Right? So how much of the dysfunction in the body is a result of inheritance? How much of it is a result of environment? How much of the dysfunction is a result of chemicals? And how much is the result of the mind? Well, we have some divine inspiration that tells us at least one of the answers. 9 times out of 10, it's the mind. That's right. At least 90% of the dysfunction in the body is a result of the mind. The other factors make up only 10% of the problem. They're not, and not saying that they're not there. They are. They're there. But they only make up 10% of the problem. Our major problem is the mind, and our major focus needs to be the mind. It needs to be there. Sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. 9/10 of the diseases from which men suffer have their foundation here. I'm going to beat this to life till it's a living reality in your lives, right? So if your hormones were not a problem before and they're a problem now, and if your hormone levels fluctuate over time, and if your symptoms come and go and get worse and better, look to the mind for the cause. Right? Look to the mind. And when the mind creates disease or dysfunction in the body, it's never on purpose. Never. It's never on purpose. It's never a conscious thing. Nobody ever creates disease in their body consciously. And there is no personal blame for it. The person who is sick should never be judged for being sick. Right? Nobody does it on purpose. Right? Nobody does. The issue is our fallen human nature. And we were all born with what? Sinful, fallen human nature. Did you ask for it? No. Did you get it? Yes. Do you operate by it? Yes. Did you ask to operate by it? No. You just got it. Right? So there's no blame for how you were born and what you were born with. But there is a problem, and that problem needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed in the right place and in the right way. That's the right place where it needs to be fixed, right? And often a combination of these factors are involved in a disease process. It involves genetics, chemicals, and environmental factors. But the origin, the beginning point is the mind. And to solve the problem, you need not only address the other secondary factors, you must go to the origin, you must address the issues of the mind. So that is the causes of dysfunction. We now have an activity that Angela is going to bring to us for a few minutes. I waxed eloquent on 168 slides. And yes, but anyways, we're going to have a brief activity before we get to lunch.
Okay, you ready for number 3? All right, number 3. The first one says, what Bible verses suggest love is spiritual information and or has power? So get out your swords, get out your Bibles. Where in the Bible does it say those things? Number 2, do you have stress? Number 3, ask God to reveal your heart and where you're blind to his truth. Remember, be making that list. What are those negative thoughts and beliefs, feelings that you have so that you can make progress on that healing and begin asking God. You can break up in your groups.
verse 3:12. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as the Father is the light. John said, "He'll go away." And we said, "That is the truth." He wants to lose weight. So, stress. Do we have stress? We have stress. Once you wake up in the morning, there's some stress. So, what's your point? Stress is like the wake up. It can be coming. We have to learn to survive. Yes. So, you really make it. You got to learn to because stress is why do we respond to stress? Say it for more than one time.
This is your 42-second warning. All right, time is up. That was some good time, some good discussion. And it's something where you can carry the discussion on to lunch because it is lunchtime. So I am going to pray, and we will pray for the food as well. And then whoever gets to the lunch line first gets to eat first. And don't forget, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. So whether our selfish human nature wants to get in the front of the line or the back of the line, it will try to do so for self's sake. So we'll pray for some Christ-likeness. We'll see how many people end up in the middle. Well, I'll tell you who will end up in the front of the line. Yeah. And the choir. I'm going to let the choir go first. The choir go first. Well, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your blessings. You are a wonderful God. Thank you for creating us in such marvelous ways. And Lord, open our eyes more and more to understand this function, the basics, and then as we build upon the basics, that we might be able to evaluate all this information floating around in this world and understand what fits and what does not fit, and that we might not be blown around by every wind of doctrine. And Lord, now as we are to transition to lunch, we ask for your blessing upon the food and that we might consume it for you, because this is your body. May we not eat for ourselves, but may we eat for you. And we might eat that we might give, and that we might reach out and bless others. And this we pray, thanking you for your blessings and your presence amongst us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, happy lunching.